So let's we don't have a lot of time left, but let's get into the idea of kind of non-duality. Or so there's a Hindu version of this in the called Advaita Vedanta, right? Mm-hmm. Where and the experience, well, intellectually, I think the idea there is that the distinction between kind of, in the Hindu version, I'm saying, the distinction between myself or even my soul and the universe or kind of the cosmic soul or something is illusory, and right. The boundaries are kind of not real. And there's an experiential apprehension of that through meditation that you can have, and it's a sense right. of unity with the cosmic soul or something. So that's Advaita Vedanta. That's the Hindu version. Now, Vasubandhu has a version of non-duality, but it's not that, right?
I don't think it's quite that. His view is, but it is about non-duality as a proper description of reality as we experience it.
So there is something illusory about the distinction between me and what I'm observing?
Exactly. So that it's still the subject-object distinction. So it's not the subject-Brahman distinction, the distinction between the soul and Brahman. It's really something different. It's in ordinary experience, we experience ourselves as a subject experiencing reality. And it's based, the analogy, I think, that's most useful is you think of the eye and a visual object. We think of those two as separate. We have our eye, and we take in eye takes in a visual object, and then the consciousness that's generated out of that has the visual perspective, and it has the object, and we have a sense of ourselves experiencing that object visually. But in what he says is that actually that's just a function of the nature of consciousness. Consciousness always appears as dual, but really, to understand it, it's a causal result of a sequence of events, just like everything else. It's a unitary event. And that event, once we understand it correctly, we can see it as non-dual. So that's also the case in our thoughts, in our experience of everything. So any given thought, we think of ourselves, I'm having a thought, I'm the one with the thought, and then the thought is something that's not me. But actually, thoughts just are a thing. They're a momentary experience that has a certain dual appearance. It seems to be subject and object, but it's not really. And that's what non-duality means for him. And because of that, it also applies to all concepts, that whatever view we have, it's always a perspective of a given individual. It's always from a particular side. All concepts have this dual structure of being biased, we could say, from a particular angle. And so everything that we experience is shot through with our view of self, with our belief in a self.
Right. And here, I mean, the question of the existence of self, I mean, on the one hand, it is a further distinction between his view and the Hindu view, because the Hindu view starts out taking the idea of a soul more seriously than a Buddhist probably would, a distinct thing that's real in itself, and thinks of this thing as kind of merging with the cosmic soul right. in the meditative experience, whereas the Buddhist starts out is like, no, that thing didn't exist in the first place. But this also, maybe I'm wrong here, but he also, I think, winds up distinguishing himself from the Buddhists in the Yogacara school, who take the mind-only view. Is that right? Because he doesn't. He wants to cast more doubt on the existence of the mind itself than they do. Again, the mind-only view is that, okay, consciousness or something in here is in the subjective world. That signifies something real, the perceive, but the world out there is kind of an illusion, as maybe Berkeley might say. But he's not winding up buying into that entirely, right?
Right. So, I mean, I'll accept everything you said, except that he's distinguishing himself from Buddhists who have a mind-only view. I'm not sure that he's distinguishing himself at this stage. Okay. It may be that his view just was the Yogacara view of the time, and then later on there were other people who reified the mind. Or it may be that he's trying to correct what he sees as some excesses within the Yogacara tradition of his time. But in any event, yes, I mean, he does want to say that even this idea of mind, the idea of there being a kind of mental basis for all things. We know that the world doesn't exist the way that we experience it. There's no physical objects out there. They're just mental constructs. And we know that, he says, once you see that that's the case, then you also have to drop out the idea that there's a mind that's experiencing that world, because the relation between mind and world is dependent upon there being a world for the mind to experience. And so once you have non-duality, the whole idea of what a mind is and what we think of as a mind falls out. And you end up with an inconceivable reality that's beyond all of our concepts.
Mm-hmm.